Center wants to extend a warm invitation for you to join us at the Good Neighbor Roundtable discussion, made possible by the Illinois Department of Human Services in partnership with the Chicago Community Trust. I am Chantel Bernardo, and I get to be your moderator for these next 2 days of wonderful discussion. Join in with us. I'm sure your life will be enriched.
My name is Jonathan Brooks. I am the senior pastor of Canaan Community Church in the West Englewood neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Been serving there for the last 15 years, loving on the greater Englewood neighborhood through our ministry and just born and raised there, so love it with all my heart.
I'm Sandra Maria Van Opstel, and I'm the Executive Director of Chasing Justice. And I live in and neighbor in and pastor in Logan Square Humboldt Park area on the northwest side of Chicago.
Hi, my name is Angelina Ileana Zayas. I am the CEO at Gap Community Center, as well as one of the pastors of Grace and Peace Church. I do my ministry and my work in the North Austin community.
Thank you guys for being here again today. We're so excited about having this conversation. We thank you for just lending your ears, your sound. Let's jump right into the conversation. So, as you all have explained, all of you are positioned in Black and Brown or both communities, either by vocation, where you work, your residential location where you live, or your community life group or life groups where you choose to do life, right? Raise your families, churches, and people groups that you do life with. Tell us a little bit about where you are specifically located and the work that you do and how you ended up where you are.
Well, I'm located on the northwest side of Chicago. That's where I live, and I basically work and neighbor and live in the same community. And the relationships that I keep really have been influenced by both the things that I'm passionate about, like the issues of justice that I'm passionate about, as well as the changing demographics in our communities and in our neighborhoods. And then, you know, in church life, really being in a church community that is both Black and Brown, and specifically here on the west side has been primarily African American and now Mexican immigrant and Central American immigrant. And so that's changed over the years, and we're just, you know, I think for me as a neighbor, I'm just trying to respond to what's happening around me and to be a good neighbor.
Thank you so much for that.
Amen. I do live adjacent to this community in a community called Hermosa. It is one of our neighboring communities to the North Austin community. A little bit about me, I am a Black and Brown woman, so it is imperative for me to be in the community where it looks like me. It's just not one ethnicity or the other. It looks and represents who I am. So that's why I love doing ministry here in the North Austin community, because it truly does represent a little bit about me, the Black and the Brown coming together.
So I am the other side. I'm the south sider. Coming from the West Englewood neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Born and raised Englewood guy. Love it to its core. Not only live there, have worked there as an educator, and also pastor there for the last 15 years. And so Englewood for me has been my teacher and my educator as far as in all of those realms. How to be a better neighbor, how to be a better father, how to be a better pastor, how to be a better educator. All that came from my connection. But what's interesting is over the last 15 years, I've watched incrementally, even though I feel like I've had a connection with a lot of Brown communities. I went to Hubbard High School, and so majority of my school was Brown, and I was like the minority there, and that's where I got my true love for hip hop. But I've watched how God has used that, because I've watched West Englewood increasingly grow, not only just in its representation with the Latinx community moving in, mostly Mexican immigrant again, south and coming into West Englewood. And that's had a high impact on how you neighbor. I mean, the home I lived in Englewood for almost 8 years, every single neighbor around that house now, whether it's the house behind, next to, are all, I think most of them are Mexican, and it's it's been a great learning curve for us. And so Canaan, the church of pastor, has been an African American church the entire time. But we're watching our community begin to shift. And as our community shifts, we know that so does what it means to be a community church in a community that's shifting and changing. So I'm excited about what that means for the ministry and what it means for us as we learn to be neighbors.
That's fantastic. Thank you guys for sharing. We shared a bit about how two communities, one that is in West Englewood, the south side of Chicago, and then kind of the north and west side of Chicago, kind of mirroring each other, not the same, but ending up kind of sharing a bit of the same trajectory, right? Our neighborhoods are changing, as we said. And so share with us some of the ways in which the communities are changing, maybe some challenges that that could be, happening around these changes. Some that maybe you've seen, some that maybe you could imagine. We'll start again with you.
I'm gonna start with the challenges. Well, I didn't identify earlier, but lest you be confused, this pale-skinned woman is a Latina. My mother is from Colombia, my father is from Argentina, and being Latina in the U.S. means I have to know the Mexican narrative, and being in this neighborhood means I have to know the Puerto Rican narrative, and so I think because of that, I've always found myself in the middle of communities. I grew up for a portion in a mostly Jewish and Latina part of the city. Then I moved out to the suburbs, and so I've always found myself as a bridge to communities, asking the question, who's not here, whose voice isn't here, who's being underrepresented here, and I think that's how I've been called specifically to the work of racial justice and reconciliation and true solidarity. That it forces us to ask the hard questions, right? It forces us to ask the hard questions. So it has caused me to ask questions, for example, about changing communities and what's causing change. So in the neighborhood I'm in, it's like the border of Logan Square, Humboldt Park. We've had so much gentrification, just well-meaning, I'm sure, people coming into the neighborhood as social workers and school teachers and artists who want to live in an ethnic community and change it, and then come behind it all the other things. Church plants that want to be multi-ethnic and all those things come into the neighborhood, change it. And that has seen a shift. And so I think that's one of the challenges is proximity geographically without proximity relationally. So you all of a sudden have these communities that are shifting where there's brown families and black families entering into one another's spaces, or even Central American families entering into Puerto Rican spaces, or Mexican into, it's all the layers, all the layers. And you eat different foods, and even if you speak Spanish, you speak different kinds of Spanish, and your kids need different things. And so I think that proximity geographically without proximity relationally causes a lot of challenges, because you're just close enough to be in each other's space, but you don't know the joys and the burdens of the people that are your neighbors.
That is so good.
That is.
Yeah.
I have just a follow-up question. Well, and you all can answer this as you're preparing, where does that responsibility lie? Is it in the neighbors that are moving in, or on the communities that have the people who have been in the neighborhood?
Hey, that's a good question.
So, we all have some kind of touch points of the Christian Community Development Association, and one of the principles of asset-based, church-based community development is relocation. And Jonathan and I, having been on a lot of the training teams, we really challenge that question of relocation, because it's really assuming that people have the choice of relocating. Like, I'm choosing as an affluent white suburban person to move into this neighborhood and be an urban city school teacher. What's happening amongst our communities, I think is it's not like a lot of us are choosing to do this. We're actually being pushed financially or being pushed racially into other communities. And so we're not even asking, like, I don't think most of the people that live in Hermosa are like, do we want to live in Hermosa or Logan? Where do we want to live? You know, it's just like, where are there people like me that I can, where is my my comadre, where's my sister, you know, like kind of my family moving that I can also share childcare with? And so I don't think most of us ask that question. I think it's like we're surviving and we're ending up in proximity to one another. I think the responsibility is on both of us, but I actually don't think anyone's asking that question to, like, I'm not choosing. It's not like I'm going to choose to live in this neighborhood. It's usually mostly like, where do I know there's affordable housing within walkable distance to a bus because I don't have public transportation, and where there's people that I can trust that I can leave my children with. I think those are the questions we're asking.
Very good questions and statements as well. So the community that I live in is, like I said, Hermosa, and when I first moved in, it was a lot of white and Puerto Ricans, and some Mexicans, second generation Mexicans as well. But now in recent years, those that cannot afford Logan Square or Humboldt Park are being pushed into Hermosa. So then there are a lot of gentrification that is happening again as well. There are teachers and doctors and lawyers that are moving into our community, which is making it difficult for our people to stay in our communities because taxes go up, etc. All those challenges come up. But I love being in the North Austin community because, again, like I said, it looks like me. But one of the things when we first started Austin, my biggest desire was to be in this community, but to learn, not to come and say, I'm going to make all these changes, or I'm going to make, here we come, we're going to do all this. No. I never desired to do that. I wanted to sit down with Ms. Johnson and learn from Ms. Johnson and tell me about all the great things that are happening in the North Austin community, or grandpas that have been here for generations, but not coming with the attitude of saying, I'm going to come and make change. I want to be a part of what God is doing in this community. And I think for me personally, if we could all have that kind of mindset to say that we're here just to do this together, figure out what life really looks like, and do this with our brothers and sisters, rubbing shoulders. And sometimes rubbing shoulders gets a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm willing and excited to learn from them and saying, you know what, please embrace me and teach me and show me what it's the beautifulness that I've been seeing here in the North Austin community and growing from that. And I think for, now I'm talking as a pastor of Grace and Peace Church, we are a black and brown church. And I know that God is challenging us to enter into a space of saying, let's learn with that same attitude. And I praise God for the team that we have and all the answers. I don't. But I'm going to come to the space saying, I want to learn. And I just love that about our community, the people that we do life with here in the North Austin community, but all of our families as well. So yeah. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, no, a lot of what I've heard is very similar in our context. So, as I said before, Canaan African American church to its core. I mean, it was Canaan Missionary Baptist Church before we decided to change the name to Canaan Community Church in 2011. I mean, it was suits, hats, true,
Praise God.
everything, every stereotype you can think of about a black church, that was Canaan, right? But what's been amazing as we've been on this journey of what it, of even just using the same language of learning with, growing with, it seems like a great idea when your community actually racially and culturally reflects what you're doing inside the building. It's super simple then, right? Like, oh, we're black, the people in our neighborhood are black, the things we do will make sense. The challenges, though, are when that's no longer the truth and you're watching people come into your community who you love, you're welcoming. I will tell you, there was so much vacant land and abandoned property in our neighborhoods, and to watch our brown brothers and sisters come in here, fix stuff up, move it in. Like, we are super excited as builders, and we've wanted to be fixed up for forever. They're just like moving. And so we're super excited, But then the question becomes, okay, we got like our deep spiritual black hymns and all the different ways that we do church, and even the way we interact with our community. We're starting to see that some of those things don't reflect the same. And so now, do we just say, well, we're a black church, so get on board with us, we love you, or do we actually as a church begin to think about what it looks like to actually become a black and brown church, and what are those complexities? And I would say that's been a real challenge. It's been a challenge for the church and for the community, because the community loves our church. They love what we do, they love what we stand for, but very few understand the context in which we come from, as far as worship is concerned, as far as the way we, even the structure, like the structure of the church, it's more authoritarian, because it's just kind of the way it's been.
Right.
So more of our ministries, like we have a food cooperative that meets on Mondays, and that's where we get a lot of our brown brothers and sisters coming to shop in the basement of the church, get the fresh fruits and vegetables, but it doesn't translate to a connection to the body. And so that's been a challenge. I think another challenge, and I know we'll probably go deeper into this later on, but has been, so even talking about those homes that they've been able to purchase, fix up, living in, and it's excellent. But there's a little bit of resentment from those who've been living in the neighborhood forever. So black folks who've been trying to buy this building next door or this vacant lot, and there's been all of this resistance, whether banks wouldn't do it, whether the aldermen wouldn't help, whether whatever. And then all of a sudden, this family moves in and they're just able to do it. And so, we're going to talk about this, I think, later on, this idea of who's more oppressed and all that other stuff. But I think that becomes a real challenge when you start talking about these people move in and they get all this help and assistance. I've been here for 30 years and I don't get nothing from my house. My roof falling in, So, yeah, those type of things. And then what does it look like to be the church and be reconcilers and mediators in the middle of that, trying to talk about the joys, but also naming the challenges that come. So yeah, those are a couple, and there's probably a longer list, but those go.
Absolutely, and I think you guys are sharing so much. I do want to kind of put a pin in the idea of, because we talked a little bit about, what does it look like as a church? What does it look like a little bit individually, but even how do we really become good neighbors? And I'm talking about, so now my next door neighbor is Mexican.
Yes,
And the way we do life is just different, right? My next door neighbor has 2 chickens that are crocking and crowing all day long, right? How do we? And my mother, who's been there since the white flight, is like, I've never, and this is you can tell the more affluent family in their larger family, because all the parties happen here. So you got a black woman in her 50s, late 50s. You got a more affluent, not really, Mexican family who's having all the parties in the world, and they got to live next door to each other. How do those are like and you got quinces going on, and you got you got all kind of things happening. You got a skeleton on the front porch all year long. Those types of things that are sometimes, I won't even say challenges, but they're barriers for us from getting to know one another. How would you encourage someone to lean into learning, and just as a neighbor?
Yes.
Because this is not, some of us, we get this because you all are pastors, right? This is something maybe we've been taught to do, or we've had a passion for. But your average neighbor, how do you lean into being a good neighbor?
I'm still learning. She's looking at me first. I'm still learning. I grew up in the suburbs, y'all, so there was space between me and my neighbors. Not a lot, but there was space, and there was a noise ordinance. So when I moved into the Logan Square Humboldt Park area, I moved into a complex, a Hispanic housing complex, and there was music and noise all day long. And I was telling my husband, I feel called to the city. We're moving back to the city. I'm going to go back to where my parents came from. And the first thing I do is it's so loud here. Why do those people have to be so loud? What is it? Some somebody drives by with their car and it's like you're sleeping, but
Yeah.
and now we enjoy those things. But at first, I'm a light sleeper, so it was like the worst. And my husband turned to me one day. He's like, listen, you are like not afraid to die. There's people getting shot at us. You're never afraid. You never talk about fear of dying, but you're so afraid to be inconvenienced.
That's so good.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Say law right there.
And it was like a reflection to me, and I was like, my preferences, my social preferences, like when you do marital counseling and premarital counseling for people, like your social preferences may be different than that of your spouse.
Yeah.
And just naming that as a reality and trying to figure out what can I do in my home to operate out of my social preferences so that when I'm outside of my home, I can operate in a more collective social preferences, right? So, I mean, I think we adjusted to the fireworks and the cones in the front and the loud, and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't actually an ethnic cultural difference for me. It was actually a social cultural difference for me, like urban versus suburban. For everything from like what the bus felt like to my neighbor's loudness, and I think I'm probably am that neighbor now. But I think naming those things is really important, like naming that you feel agitated when, and having someone in your home or to just confess that to, so that they can say, look, you're more afraid to be inconvenienced than you are to actually get shot on our street. Because that was what we were experiencing a lot of. And every time something would happen like that, my sister would say, you want to still live here? This is happening? It didn't cross my mind to leave. But every time I heard that music at night, or that neighbor's window that was so close when they were smoking, you could smell their smoke of all kinds. I was like, I got to get out of here. Like, I got to get out of here. And so I think knowing that those social preferences are important to being a good neighbor. There's more I can say about that, but I think for me, I'm just being honest. That's what happened for me. I was like, everything from how like the volume at which people talk.
Yeah.
Like, because Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Central Americans are all very different, and so even if you're from the same culture ethnically,
It's all different.
it's still different nationally, and so I'm sure that there's a lot of stuff happening between different Latino ethnic groups as well. So. I think just self-awareness and knowing what your social preferences are is very important to confession and repentance and change. I'm not perfect, but I'm on my way.
Getting there. So I was raised in Chicago, and hearing, the sirens and police cars and the yelling and the screaming was the norm for me.
It's like white noise.
Exactly. Actually, I know that time when I go to the country, to the suburbs, I'm like, it's too quiet. I get a little too afraid being out there because I don't know what to expect. But in our neighborhood, I know what to expect. So when I'm at home, it's so funny when I drive back from the country, I'm home. Even hearing the noise and the sirens and the smells, and I love my community. Yes, it's been changing these last couple of years, but I wouldn't want it any other way, because this is how I was raised. And in recent years, just seeing and learning, I think that's the biggest thing for me. I guess I'm in a position and a time in my life. I'm getting older. I'm over the 50 mark, and I've gotten to a place that I want to just be with people and learn about them and hear those stories and eat their food, because I think that that's a thing that really just like literally breaks that barrier for me. I have to go back to Miss Johnson, because Miss Johnson would just come. She lives literally across the alley from us, and she'll look out her window and see that there are all of our cars. She knows all of our cars. And what she'll do is that she'll make us mac and cheese and collard greens and fried chicken and in the beginning you're like, this is not my norm. It's not my norm. But the Lord is like not wanting us to be comfortable in our norm. He wants to stretch us. And I was like, and to be very transparent, I was not raised African American, being African American. So it's still a learning tool for me, and understanding my culture, my food, my people. And when Miss Johnson would come in, so she has such a heart. She would like, Pastora, this is the best food ever, and I made it for you. And I'm like, Mama, give me a plate. And we're eating it and eating it. She told me how she makes this and how she makes a cornbread and how she, and then I had to sit back and say, thank you, Lord. I was raised that way. My mom is making cornbread and greens and fried chicken. And I'm just so very thankful for the opportunity to break bread with my brothers and sisters in this community, because I think that is when they know I'm not a threat, and they feel like, oh, this girl's coming in, this pastor's coming in, this church is coming in, not to say we're going to take over. No, we're saying let's come together and learn from each other. And I love that we're planning some cultural awareness activities, and you bring your food this month, you bring your food this month, you bring your food this month, so that we can learn more about, and I think, again, to confess that we don't have all the answers is what the church, being a good neighbor, should be.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get to that place,
Yes.
Yep.
Jesus,
Yeah,
come on.
that's it.
Hearing all that music, seeing all the Mexican brothers and sisters coming to our community, we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Because they just got to, once you get that little door open, they're like, come on. They're going to embrace you, they're going to love you, they're going to care for you. And I love that about both my Puerto Rican ethnicity as well as my Black ethnicity, and putting those two together. I say often, it is the best of both worlds for
Amen.
me. It is who I am.
Yeah.
Amen.
My words, my language, my tone is who I am. And I say thank you to Jesus for that often. Sorry, it took a long time
No,
on that
that
one.
was good. That was
Good.
I think whenever I talk about being a neighbor, I think the principles that I use, hopefully they work, whether we're talking about ethnicity, whether you're talking about, context, urban, suburban, whether you're talking about, we the same race, same everything, I just don't like y'all, right? Like,
Right.
the way you live is not the way I would live, And the truth of the matter is, and I learned this from my neighbors, like when I finally moved back into Inglewood, what I learned was is the more you understand what communal flourishing actually looks like, what it means for us all to want everyone to do
Yes.
well.
Come on.
It changes the way you interact with your neighbors, right? No matter who ends up moving next to you,
Come on.
if what you're saying is, I want everybody in my vicinity to do well, you will not know what that means unless you have a relationship. And so it causes you to say, hey, I want to know your story. I want to know what made you move here? What got you here? Did you choose it? Did you get forced here? Like, what happened? Right? And then the more you learn about that, the more you learn about culture, the more you learn about story, the more you understand family structure, all those things. You begin to understand what it means to actually be a neighbor to those people who stay next door to you. So when our Mexican neighbors moved in next door and we lived on Honorary, I always remember, there's an old TV show, Home Improvement, where he only talked to his neighbor Wilson over the fence. That's how I felt about me and my Mexican neighbors, because we always talked over the fence, and they were always grilling, like always outside grilling. And I love to barbecue, so I would be like, every time they fire up the grill, I'm like, I'm going to barbecue. And so we talked, and then eventually we started passing food over the fence, right? And then as we were eating each other's food at the fence, we started talking about each other's family, right? And so it's like, what is the low-hanging fruit? What is it that you see that we can already connect over? And it doesn't have to be that we never became best friends. We never I never went to their house and none of those things happened, but we had a connection. We had a relationship, right? And then when they started growing in the backyard, then I was like, hey, Shell, they grow in the backyard. My wife loves to grow. Then they started talking about growing vegetables and all these things happen. And so I just think it's the organic nature of saying, I really want everybody that I know and come in contact with that I'm a neighbor of to do well. I want them to be happy. I want them to be joyful. I want their life to be just. I want them to have the best of the world. And if that's the case, then how can I want that for them and not even know them and not even attempt? Right? So no matter what the differences are, my desire to see our whole community flourish supersedes that. And I'm going to just do my best. Even with people I've had some neighbors and I'm like, Lord, but I want what's best for them too. And so I have to do the best I can.